Good Friday evening. I'm Natalie Edwards. Tonight's top stories. All eyes on tomorrow's high-stakes trade talks in Geneva as the U.S. and China attempt to navigate the fallout from bruising tariffs. We'll look at the prospects for a deal. The Chinese exports logging surprise growth in April with a 21% rise in shipments to Southeast Asia, offsetting an equivalent plunge in the U.S. exports. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping standing side by side as Russia marks Victory Day with a military parade that featured a contingent of North Korean troops. Meantime, Pyongyang says its missile launches yesterday, overseen by leader Kim Jong-un, simulated nuclear strikes on Seoul and Washington. Also in East Asia tonight, from power-hungry data centers to the most advanced computing chips, the race for AI supremacy is surging ahead as more adopt the tool. But what does this mean for human development?
Gratias referentes, hoc sacrificium vivum et sanctum.
And newly elected Pope Leo holds his first Mass at the Sistine Chapel. The 69-year-old made history after becoming the first pontiff to hail from the United States. U.S. and Chinese officials are set to begin official trade negotiations in Switzerland this weekend. The talks, which will be closely watched by governments and businesses alike, could signal potential de-escalation between the two rival superpowers for the first time since President Donald Trump sparked a tit-for-tat tariff war with Beijing last month. Now, the U.S. leader says that Washington may consider reducing duties of 145% on Chinese imports if all goes well. He adds that the upcoming meeting would be substantive and expressed optimism that China is open to a deal. Beijing also struck a confident note ahead of those talks. It says it has full confidence in its ability to manage trade issues with the U.S. Now, the prolonged trade war has taken a toll on U.S. and China. Chinese policymakers this week eased key monetary policy tools, including liquidity injection and targeted funding for its economy. The move represents some of China's most sweeping measures to boost domestic activity since September. Well, April's data showed exports to the U.S. fell by more than 20% compared to a year earlier. The upcoming talks come on the heels of the UK's striking a trade deal with the Trump administration. Washington has agreed to reduce import taxes on a number of British cars, but it will leave a 10% duty in place on most goods from the UK. All right, for more, Ross Cullen joins us now from Paris. Ross, first up, walk us through some of the potential scenarios that we can expect from these talks.
Well, Natalie, let me begin with the European stock markets here. They've been reacting positively this Friday morning. All of the main indices, the DAX in Germany, the MIB in Italy, the IBEX in Spain and the CAC 40 here in France, all in the black. They're all up in the green, not surging, but they are reacting positively to these trade talks happening in Switzerland this weekend between the United States and Washington. There's been a little bit of tit for tat in who actually requested this meeting. China says that the Trump administration asked for the talks to be held, but in fact Donald Trump pushed back on that, saying that they said we initiated it. Well, I think they should go back and study their files, okay? So there's already been a little bit of that tit for tat in terms of setting the scene for the meeting between US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and the Chinese Vice Premier He Feng. This weekend they'll be looking at possible consultations about a compromise. Can they reduce those tariffs that have been put in place? Can they remove them entirely? They've been at 145% from the US on China and 125% on Beijing to Washington. Can they at least perhaps agree to hold further talks down the line? It's certainly that a lot of countries will be watching, because these two countries are the world's biggest economies, and the fact that they've been in a trade war pretty much since the start of April has been rocking the global economy.
Now, Ross, as we mentioned earlier, talks are coming right after the trade deal between the US and UK. But some experts are actually saying that it's only the bare bones of a narrow agreement. How so?
Well, the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been hailing this trade deal, and certainly Donald Trump was praising it as well on his social media platform Truth Social as a very big and important deal with a very big and important country, saying that there will be other deals to come. It's certainly been a boost for Keir Starmer. Domestically, he's been under pressure for some very poor local election results last week. But overall, it's not a full and comprehensive deep trade partnership that we have seen recently signed between London and Delhi. The one that's been signed between London and Washington does remove some of the tariffs on cars. They have been removed from 25% down to 10%. All steel and aluminium tariffs have been scrapped entirely, but there's no mention of pharmaceuticals. So it does mean that there could perhaps be the potential for some de-escalation between the US and China, because the US has now shown it's willing to sign trade deals with other countries. There could be de-escalation, perhaps room for consultation and compromise. However, it's not all rosy when it comes to the picture from Europe, because I will mention that yesterday, on the 8th of May, the European Union did release a statement saying that it was consulting on possible countermeasures and readying World Trade Organization litigation in response to the United States tariffs. The EU saying that those tariffs blatantly violate fundamental WTO rules. Ateli?
Many thanks for that report. Ross Cullen in Paris. Well, the US has indeed unveiled a new trade agreement with the UK. This announcement is the first since Washington announced a 90-day pause on sweeping reciprocal tariffs a month ago.
With this deal, the UK joins the United States in affirming that reciprocity and fairness is an essential and vital principle of international trade.
In the end, it comes down to, as you say, Donald, economic security is national security. On national security, we've been absolutely the closest of allies for so many years, keeping the peace through that close alliance, that friendship. And now we add to that this deal on trade and the economy.
No formal deal has yet been signed, but as Mr. Trump says, the final details are still being written up. The bilateral trade agreement is reportedly set to offer relief for key UK industries from some of the new tariffs announced by President Donald Trump. But it will leave a 10% duty in place on most goods from the UK. Well, the agreement has found criticism in the UK, some pointing to how moving closer to the Trump administration might hurt their relations with other trading partners. But as John Beaver reports, both sides are welcoming the warming of trade ties.
The UK government says this new deal helps protect British businesses and British jobs. Car makers seem to be one of the big winners. Those exporting from here to the US, like Jaguar Land Rover, will see tariffs drop from 27.5% to 10% for the first 100,000 cars. The steel industry is also set to benefit. I went to visit Tata Steel over the bridge from me here at Port Albert in South Wales earlier this week. They're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on new facilities, having previously closed their blast furnace. They told me that tariffs were causing huge uncertainty, so this announcement allows for some longer-term planning and production. Rolls-Royce do a lot of work on their jet engines here in Bristol. Those engines will now be able to enter the US tariff-free. In return, the UK is buying $10 billion worth of planes from Boeing. Both sides have promised closer cooperation on technology and working together in the future in areas like biotech and quantum computing. But there are also worries about the impact of new reciprocal market access on beef and how that will affect British farmers. Questions remain as well about pharmaceuticals, and especially about whether a deal can be reached to avoid 25% tariffs that have been threatened that would have a major impact on large UK companies like GlaxoSmithKline and AstraZeneca. But a huge part of this deal and the surrounding announcement has been about establishing a better relationship through trade between two countries with traditionally strong ties. This was the second trade deal here in as many days after a new agreement between the UK and India was announced on Tuesday. That deal was far more wide-ranging and comprehensive in nature, But the government here are claiming the two deals show they're getting a sluggish economy back on track and negotiating a world of difficult trading relationships. The UK government has sought to win points by highlighting they're the first to do a deal like this with the Trump administration. But critics argue that could actually have an adverse reaction on UK relations with the European Union, as the UK also seeks to reset that relationship. John Beaver, CNA, Bristol in the UK.
Russian President Vladimir Putin hosted more than 20 world leaders during a Victory Day military parade in Moscow, marking Nazi Germany's defeat in World War II. Thousands of soldiers marched at the parade, including Russian troops who had fought in the war against Ukraine, as Moscow seeks to garner support at home and project strength abroad. Chinese leader Xi Jinping, the guest of honor, was side by side with Mr. Putin throughout, showcasing China's no-limit friendship with Russia. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva and Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro were also among the other leaders present. Mr. Putin also greeted military personnel from North Korea during the parade. Pyongyang has become one of Moscow's main allies, with more than 10,000 North Korean troops deployed to fight against Ukraine. Although Kim Jong-un did not attend the parade in Moscow, he made a rare visit to the Russian embassy in Pyongyang to mark Victory Day. A North Korean state media says yesterday's missile test was a simulation of nuclear counterstrikes against perceived enemies, South Korea and the U.S. According to KCNA, Thursday's drills involved a missile system that could launch rockets 60 centimeters in diameter, as well as a tactical ballistic missile. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un oversaw the exercise, and he was quoted as saying that it is important to perfect the country's combat readiness of its nuclear force to, quote, deter war and fight war. South Korea and Japan earlier condemned North Korea over the tests. Seoul says it is analyzing the move to determine intent and is also communicating its findings with Washington and Tokyo. Japan, meantime, lodged a protest through embassy routes in China, accusing North Korea of violating UN Security Council resolutions. The latest launch follows accusations against Pyongyang of exporting short-range ballistic missiles and other weapons to Moscow to aid in its war with Kyiv. Both North Korea and Russia have denied those allegations. Our break's up next, but coming up on East Asia tonight, TSMC's April sales by electronics firms' efforts to acquire essential components ahead of higher tariffs. And a gauge of the Taiwan dollar against its major trading partners' currencies threatens to breach a level closely watched by the central bank. Hello again. It is time now for business news with Roland Lim. Roland, China's export growth demonstrated surprising resilience last month. What's that all about?
Right, Roselli. Yeah, the surge was better than markets had anticipated. But beneath that rosy number, there's a marked shift in the composition of outbound shipments. China's exports grew sharply in April, beating forecasts, even as shipments to the U.S. recorded a big slump in the first month after President Trump slapped Chinese goods with tariffs above 100%. Total exports from China grew to 8.1% on year, handily beating market expectations of a 2% increase. Now that's as the 21% drop in sales to the U.S. was likely offset by an equal percentage growth in shipments to Southeast Asia and 8% to the EU. The figures underscore how U.S. tariffs on China are reshaping its global trade. Our factories front-loading shipments ahead of U.S. tariffs may be a factor in the surge in Chinese exports. Still, the pace of total Chinese export growth slowed from the 12% rise a month earlier. Meanwhile, total imports into China for April came in not as bad as expected, reporting a 0.2% decline on year versus market estimates of a 6% drop. Experts say the positive data strengthens Beijing's hand ahead of crucial trade negotiations due to start this weekend in Switzerland. The U.S. president said he expects there to be substantive negotiations and signal tariffs on Beijing will likely come down. China says it has full confidence in its ability to manage U.S. trade issues. But U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is not too hopeful, saying he is looking for some de-escalation. Currently, U.S. duties on Chinese goods stand at 145%, and Beijing, 125% on imports from the U.S. A caution reigned supreme on the mainland trading floors ahead of that key meeting. The Shanghai Composite declined 0.3%, while Shenzhen ending the day 0.7 in the red. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index, though, it did close up 0.4% after fluctuating between gains and losses to stand at a near 5-week high. Elsewhere in the region, Japan's Nikkei average closed at a more than 1-month high as risk appetite was lifted after a U.S. trade agreement with Britain raised optimism for progress in talks with other countries. South Korea's Kospi closed lower as losses in battery makers offset strong performances by automakers. And Taiwan's benchmark index ending the week as well in the green. Taiwanese chip-making titan TSMC's revenue soared in the month of April after U.S. President Trump's global tariff blitz spurred companies to stock up in case of higher levies that were in the pipeline. The chipmaker of choice for tech giants NVIDIA and Apple reported sales of $11.6 billion. That's up 48.1% from a year earlier and 22% up from March. Now, despite the Trump administration's trade war, TSMC says demand remains resilient, including for high-end NVIDIA chips critical to developing artificial intelligence. The firm has been in the crosshair of President Trump, who has accused Taiwan of stealing the U.S. chip industry. In addition to the looming U.S. tariffs, TSMC faced headwinds from a recent surge of the Taiwan dollar. Now, experts warn it could pressure TSMC's margins going forward, as most of its business is conducted in U.S. dollars. TSMC has said that for every 1% of appreciation of the local currency, there is a 0.4% percentage point erosion of its operating margin. A gauge of the Taiwan dollar against its major trading partners' currencies surged to a record high this week, threatening to breach a level closely watched by the central bank. The Taiwanese dollar's historic rally has pushed the currency's nominal effective exchange rate, or NER, that's a measure of its performance relative to a basket of other currencies, to a record high this week, according to data compiled by the Bank of International Settlements. After a volatile few days, it has settled around 30 to the dollar, more than 6% stronger from where it had finished in April. Rest of the Asian currencies also gaining strength. The Japanese yen currently 0.4% stronger against the greenback, 143.37 to the dollar. The Korean won is also stronger by 0.35%. Singapore dollar not far off from its decade highs. Hong Kong dollar has retreated from the strong side of its band after heavy intervention from the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. The recent weakness in the greenback has been dubbed as Asian crisis in reverse. Now, this happens when investors seek alternatives to US dollar-denominated assets amid trade tariff uncertainties. Now, we spoke to an analyst, Garrett Lim, who remains optimistic on the outlook for Asian currencies.
We suddenly saw such a big change, especially last week. We really saw the Taiwanese dollar really moving pretty aggressively, actually, strengthening quite a bit, 5-6%. For a currency which really doesn't move that much, which was absolutely incredible. So obviously this is really tied to the potential trade talks that could happen. I think everybody wants to sort of maybe not have such weak currency going into the talks. And then suddenly we just saw a lot of people sort of with a lot of US dollars actually feeling that maybe it's time to move some of that money back into the local currencies as they start to appreciate. And we actually saw a bit of a stampede, unfortunately. So we saw that not just in Taiwanese dollar, but we also saw that in the ringgit, we saw that in Japanese yen as well. Essentially, what's been happening is that a lot of exporters have been, getting US dollar receipts and actually holding that. And some of that has actually been being reinvested in bonds, but also in equities and lots of US assets. And actually, that's been a really, really good trade. So US dollar strengthening, local currencies in Asia really depreciating slightly, but you're actually getting a carry from the performance in some of the assets. So it's been a really, really good trade. And what's happened is that a lot of people just said maybe that trade is not really going to be as good as it was before. And suddenly you saw a few people move that money back. And then obviously that sort of led to a lot of people worried about that and then started moving. And then it really moved the currencies pretty substantially. So, it's not just in Taiwan, but it's all along Asia. I mean, there's a lot of retail money, as you know, in the US. So, some of that volatility has really caused people to say, hey, you know what, let's just go back to safe harbor, take a little bit of risk off, move some of that money back into Asian currencies, but unfortunately everybody doing that at the same time really caused a huge move in all local currencies.
Shares of China's top chipmaker SMIC plunging as much as 11% in Hong Kong today after it warned of lower sales in the second quarter caused by production disruptions. Co-CEO Zhao Haiqun said that sales would fall between 4 and 6% in the second quarter versus projections for a sharp rise. Now, that's as the company discovered issues with its production lines, which affected the accuracy and yield of its products. Pricing pressures and weaker than expected domestic demand for chips also eating into the chipmaker's bottom line. The company's first quarter earnings increased more than 28% on year, and net profit rose around 162% on year to $188 million. But it still fell short of analyst estimates of $218 million. Despite the somber outlook, the company says it is staying the course to expand capacity and output with plans to invest more than $7 billion this year, playing down the potential damage from US tariffs, adding that the company mainly supplies to the Chinese market. Shares of SMIC paring back some of the day's losses to end down nearly 5% lower. Panasonic has announced plans to slash 10,000 jobs worldwide as part of a massive overhaul to boost profitability. The company says the cuts will target 5,000 employees in Japan and another 5,000 from its overseas holdings and will take place over the course of the current fiscal year. It expects the restructuring to cost nearly $900 million. The Osaka-based conglomerate is a major battery supplier for Elon Musk's Tesla and also operates in the housing, energy, and auto sectors. Earlier this year, Panasonic announced its goal to return on equity of 10% by the end of this decade and will cull its non-growth operations. The company also reported its earnings for its key EV battery making unit at $830 million for the year ending March, $20 million short of its forecast. Staying in Japan, its Fair Trade Commission has warned that at least 15 luxury hotel operators in Tokyo of a potential breach of anti-monopoly rules. The FTC says that these hotel operators have been exchanging information about room prices and other matters, which could amount to price fixing and risk violating rules that cover cartel-like behavior. The warning comes as hotel fees in the capital have risen sharply due to a surge in the number of foreign visitors, fueled by a weaker yen. Now, nearly 37 million overseas tourists visited the country in 2024, outstripping an earlier pre-pandemic peak. And you're up to date with the business news. Oteli.
Oh, thanks so very much for that, Roland. We're going to go for another break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, top executive at U.S. tech giants call on Washington to boost infrastructure and exports to stay ahead of Beijing in the artificial intelligence race. And what has been the impact of artificial intelligence on human development as the tech becomes ever more present in our daily lives? We'll have more analysis with an expert after this break. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. US and China due to hold high-stakes trade talks in Geneva tomorrow, raising hopes of a de-escalation in the tariff stalemate between the world's two biggest economies. Chinese exports logging surprise growth in April with a 21% rise in shipments to Southeast Asia, offsetting an equivalent plunge in US exports. And Russia marks a Victory Day with a military parade that featured a contingent of North Korean troops, with Chinese President Xi Jinping among the more than 20 world leaders in attendance. Now, executives of U.S. tech giants have stressed that Washington needs to ramp up its efforts in the artificial intelligence sector to stay ahead of Beijing in the battle for supremacy. Top officials from OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, Microsoft, as well as chipmaker AMD, attended a Senate hearing aimed at cutting regulatory barriers. Well, they argued for greater investments in infrastructure as they warned of a narrowing technological gap.
I believe the next decade will be about abundant intelligence and abundant energy, making sure that America leads in both of those, that we are able to usher in these dual revolutions that will change the world we live in, I think in incredibly positive ways, is critical.
It is a race. Leadership is absolutely not guaranteed. It's a global race that will shape the outcome of national security and economic prosperity for many decades to come. Now, maintaining our lead actually requires excellence at every layer of the stack.
The lesson from Huawei and 5G is whoever gets there first will be difficult to supplant. We need to export with the right kinds of controls. We need to win the trust of the rest of the world.
The hearing comes in the wake of notable Chinese gains in AI computing, with startup DeepSeek shocking the industry with its high-quality and affordable AI model. Tech company Huawei, which has long been targeted by Washington, meantime released its own advanced AI chip, seeking to match the top-end NVIDIA-designed chips that are dominating the market. The United Nations has warned that as the use of artificial intelligence grows, human development stalls. Now, in the UN's recent 2025 Human Development Report, it says humanity is at a crossroads, noting that while AI can transform societies, it also risks deepening inequalities. Well, the report observes that with the use of AI, human development levels have slowed, and traditional development paths are seen to narrow due to automation and economic pressures. The UN says the projected growth for human development is the smallest increase since 1990. That's excluding the crisis COVID-19 years of 2020 to 21. Progress is measured across a range of indicators known as the Human Development Index, and it covers achievements in health and education along with levels of income. Well, the UN argues that AI should instead be leveraged to create new opportunities through human-machine collaboration, such as through building a complementary economy, where the technology augments instead of competing against humans. The organization also says technological advances should be aligned with human needs and to hinge progress on human-centered choices that can better help shape inclusive and equitable outcomes across societies. Well, lots to unpack here. So for more insights, let's turn to Professor James Pang from the Department of Analytics and Operations at the National University of Singapore. Well, thanks for joining us, Professor Pang. First up, this is a big report, all 328 pages worth, and it highlights, how AI could potentially reignite development. But I just want to talk about some of the positive things that could possibly come out of this. And what do you think you see as some of the positive ways AI being applied in East Asia to boost things like, healthcare, education, or even incomes?
All right. Yeah. Thanks for the question. Right. If you are following up the recent news about AI, you may know that Microsoft co-founder, right, Bill Gates, actually commented on this topic recently, right? And he pointed out that AI is going to help us discover the new tools to transform healthcare and education industry entirely. I agree with him. In fact, I have been collaborating with some healthcare technology companies in some research projects, right? And it's clear AI is already making a significant impact in the healthcare sector, right? And some use case, including in the the AI diagnostic tool, right? And the AI powered tools like the computer vision are already helping the doctors to detect disease, right? For example, the cancer, and also provide a personalized treatment and recommendations, right? And also some areas are including in the drug discovery, right? And AI is accelerating the development of a new drug by helping pharmaceutical companies to identify promising compounds and optimize the clinical trials design, right? And also in the resource allocation, right? For example, predict AI helps government optimize the vaccine distribution and anticipate the hospital resource needs, right? And in terms of in the education industry, because I'm working in the education industry, right? In fact, right now, in NUS here, right, many students already use the AI assistant, right, for example, the ChatGPT to help on their projects, assignments, and writing reports, right? And even for my kids, right, they are still studying the secondary school and junior college, right? They are actually using the ChatGPTs almost every day in their studies. So that actually we see the AI already making a very significant impact in the education industry, right? And some prominent use case in the education industry includes, right, the personalized learning, right? In fact, Bill Gates emphasized it in his, comments, right?
So I hear what you're saying, Professor Pang,
adapt.
about how education and healthcare have benefited from AI. But I just want to talk about what about aging population, declining birth rates, though, which we know it's happening, in South Korea and Japan. And it sounds like a stretch, but do you think AI plays a role in helping governments tackle these issues?
This actually, is a complex question, I would say, right? Because AI for the aging populations, they do have some companies, they already provide like the AI-powered robot, right? And the home assistants, right? To help offer the company shifts to the elderly, right? And also some companies, they develop the AI-driven like a fall detection systems, right? To help to reduce the hospitalization rate, right? And because it's like a not like a very significant impact in this area yet, right? And also talking about the birth rates, I would like to look at this in the more, both of the direct and indirect way, right? In the direct way, we can see some AI algorithms already help to improve the in vitro fertilization success rate, right? Which could potentially increase the birth rate to some extent, right? And if we're talking about indirect way in this birth rate, right now, we all know, right, the AI is a good assistant, right, to help us to improve the job efficiency. And this potentially also support a better work-life balance, right, and the family planning, right? So in such condition, maybe, the people may be willing to have more children. But again, in this area, I think it's not like a very clear impact yet. Yeah.
I'll talk about regulation, though. Governments, I imagine it's a very tough task trying to strike the right balance between encouraging innovation and also making sure that, there is enough regulation in place to prevent harm. So countries like US, EU, and China, which is state-owned model, they're taking very different approaches there. So, what sorts of complications do you see that arising from that sort of approach?
Yeah, I think if you're talking about the regulation part, right? Because right now, how to balance the AI regulation and the rapid AI development, this actually is a complex and tough question, right? And many countries are exploring this right now, right? Like you mentioned, US, China, they're taking from the state approach, right? In fact, two countries, they're also a little bit different, right? Although they are, have a state strategy, right? US, I think they are still a little bit more like open, right? And let the company to make their own decisions in AI regulation, right? And the China part is more like a state control, right? I think for the East Asia country, right? I think probably we can also explore some other ways, right? Between these two, strategic, right? And potentially can also take some leadership in this area, right? In fact, Singapore government, right, have AI regulation frameworks, right, announced a couple of years ago, right? And also this is a good area for some countries to, to maybe establish a leadership in this area.
Right. I got to talk about how, we're all talking about tariffs day in, day out here, across the media. So help us understand this, right? So despite the U.S. current standing in AI development relative to China, meaning U.S. is more advanced, how might this ongoing trade tensions and tariffs and all of that, which are increasing costs in the U.S., introduce new uncertainties and perhaps shifts in the AI competition between these two superpowers?
Yeah, of course, right now you're talking about a trade tension, right? And it did affect the whole AI ecosystem, right? Because we all know the US control the export of some advanced AI chips to China, right? For example, the NVIDIA A100, right, H100, etc. Right? Of course, China, right, to tackle this problem, they also have to, launch their own strategy, right, to develop their own like a chip design, right. For example, Huawei already made some good progress in this area, right. And this like the trade tension, based on my opinion, right, I think probably it may not good for the whole AI ecosystem, right, because this made the whole AI ecosystem be fragmented, right. And I'm like more pro to the globalization and also the global collaborations in the AI development area, right. So that if these trade tension continue, right, and then probably will create some silos in this AI ecosystem, right, and also will affect the tariffs, the exchange, right, among the different countries, right. I think collaboration is still very important for the whole AI development and the whole AI launch, in my opinion.
All right, it's been good chatting with you. Thank you so much for your time and thoughts. Professor James Pang there from the Department of Analytics and Operations at the National University of Singapore. And of course, you can head to CNA.Asia for more of our coverage on artificial intelligence, such as this story on how Hong Kong is tapping on the emerging tech as one key sector to drive the city's growth. Coming up, we go beyond East Asia to the conflict between India and Pakistan, where mutual accusations of drone attacks between the nuclear-armed rivals are sparking fears of an all-out military confrontation. India and Pakistan have accused each other of drone attacks, sparking fears of a broader military confrontation between the two nuclear-armed neighbours. New Delhi says the Pakistani military launched multiple attacks, violating the ceasefire along the line of control. And it says the attacks overnight were effectively repulsed. Well, sirens sounded and blackouts were enforced in parts of North and West India. Flashes were seen in the night sky in the cities of Jammu and Udhampur in the north, as well as in Jaisalmer in the western state of Rajasthan. India has shut 24 airports in the region for civilian operations, increased border patrols, and cancelled police leave in response. Pakistan, meanwhile, reiterated that it has not targeted Indian cities. It says it shot down 29 drones from India at multiple locations, warning that further retaliation is, quote, increasingly certain. India earlier said its military had targeted air defense radars and systems in Pakistan, claiming that Islamabad attempted to engage Indian military targets.
Indian response has been in the same domain with the same intensity as Pakistan. It has been reliably learnt that an air defense system at Lahore has been neutralized.
Well, our correspondents Neha Punia in New Delhi and Hira Mustafa in Islamabad joins us live now. First to you, Neha. India increasing security arrangements countrywide. Does this mean that the authorities foresee the conflict worsening despite calls for de-escalation?
It certainly appears so, Telly. We've seen how in the last few hours the defense ministers chaired a high-level meeting with the heads of the armed forces. The home ministers reviewed security along the border areas as well as at airports. We've seen how most border regions are on very high alert. Emergency measures are in place. Hospitals are being put on standby, security being increased also at ports, we're also hearing air raid warning drills that are happening, not just in other cities, but here in the capital city as well. And this is coming after India's accused Pakistan of firing multiple drones and missiles overnight, saying there were numerous ceasefire violations by the Pakistani army as well, and that all of these attacks were effectively repulsed. There were no damages. India saying that these drones and missiles targeted military installations in the north and west of the country, saying that all nefarious designs will be met with force. India has reiterated at multiple points in the last few days that it does not want escalation. Its response, whether it was to carry out those initial military strikes on terror camps or the drone attacks in the last few days, was a response to an initial escalation by Pakistan. And that's a stance that it's sticking to. But we've seen how civilian life is also being impacted, with airports being shut and emergency measures being announced. We've also seen how a big cricket tournament that India was hosting, the Indian Premier League, has now been suspended for a week amid heightened tensions between the nuclear-armed neighbors. But India very categorical in its blame, saying that Islamabad is the one that's escalating tensions and that India is a responsible nation, but it won't sit back and exercise restraint if its sovereignty, is being challenged.
So, Hira, what is Pakistan's response to that? I mean, what are the efforts they're taking to de-escalate this crisis with India?
Well, on the diplomatic front, Pakistan's foreign minister on daily basis is holding one-on-one meetings with the diplomatic missions. In the last couple of days, we have seen a flurry of bilateral meetings in Islamabad. And earlier in a day, the interior minister, who was the main man of the Pakistan taking care of the security matters, in less than 48 hours had a second meeting with the U.S. Chargé d'Affaires in Islamabad, and in which he deliberate upon the security measures that Pakistan is putting in place in reaction to the Indian airstrikes that were carried out by India on Wednesday. And after that, we have seen tit-for-tat response from both these sides. And having said that, Pakistan is also closely engaging with the top diplomats from Saudi Arabia, US, Britain, China, Russia, and Iran also. The crucial regional countries who are friends with both the warring countries. In view of this, Pakistan hopes that sanity prevails in Delhi. That's what the politicians in the country are pointing towards, stating that Pakistan is not the one who is resorting to aggression. It was India who resorted to aggression while targeting civilian areas in Pakistan-administered Kashmir and Punjab's province. So in next couple of hours, a very important briefing is going to be held by Pakistan's military spokesperson, in which we are going to see some new strategy that how Pakistan wants to de-escalate the situation, as analysts are worried about the escalating tensions between both India and Pakistan, as the fear that this conflict could lead to a full-scale war, and it's going to have global implications.
Yeah, and we'll be looking out for that briefing as well. Thank you so very much to you both, Neha Punia in New Delhi and Hira Mustafa in Islamabad. Well, let's take a quick look now at the trade market reaction from both the countries. The Indian benchmarks on course for a second straight session of losses, while Pakistan's KSE 100 up more than 2% today after tanking about 11% in yesterday's trading. The Indian rupee strengthened about 0.2% against the greenback after the central bank likely intervened to support the currency. Let's turn our attention to Pope Leo now, who has held his first Mass as head of the Catholic Church since being elected to the role. Well, the first American pontiff returned to the Sistine Chapel, where the conclave that chose him met for a private Mass with cardinals. Pope Leo used his first homily to highlight the role of the Church as an increasingly bright beacon in a troubled world. Well, the pontiff was considered a surprise choice. He became a cardinal just 2 years ago, rarely giving interviews, and is also said to have a shy personality. Leo succeeds Pope Francis, who died last month. The new 69-year-old pontiff, who hails from Chicago, faces a huge responsibility of leading 1.4 billion Catholics worldwide, nearly 20% of the global population. Well, the direction that he sets for the Church will inevitably be compared to the no-frills approach of his predecessor. He has urged the faithful to build bridges.
Aiutateci anche voi, poi gli uni gli altri, a costruire i ponti con il dialogo, con l'incontro, unendoci tutti per essere un solo popolo, sempre in pace. Grazie a Papa Francesco.
Congratulatory messages for the new American pontiff. China, which has no official diplomatic relations with the Holy See, has sent its congratulations to the new pontiff and expressed hopes that the Vatican under Pope Leo will continue to engage in constructive dialogue with Beijing. Taiwanese President William Lai praised the Pope's election, saying that Taiwan looks forward to work on addressing world issues. The Vatican is one of a dozen countries to retain formal diplomatic ties with the self-ruled island. Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim has also congratulated the Catholic faithful around the world and in Malaysia on the election. He added that Malaysia values its ties with the Holy See and looks forward to continue the engagement. And we've got Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has expressed hope that the new pontiff will lead the Catholic Church with compassion and bring it closer to the poor and disadvantaged. Catholics in the Philippines welcomed the first American pontiff, expressing support for him at a time of instability and geopolitical strife. While Asia's largest Catholic population wanted a prominent Filipino cardinal, Luis Antonio Tagle, to succeed the late Pope Francis, they still express support for the new leader.
Hindi naman po siya disappointment kasi po may basehan naman po yung pagpili ng mga Santo Papa at siguro po hindi pa niya panahon para mapili. So ayun po, masaya naman po ako na elected naman din siya at masaya ako na nabigyan siya ng pagkakataon na mapunta sa Vatican din.
Meanwhile, Australians are celebrating the good news. Many are pinning their hopes on the new Catholic leader to chart a progressive and inclusive era, as previously demonstrated by his predecessor.
It is a big deal, yeah. I mean, we'll miss the old Pope, but, you know, we just hope that it's going to be good for the younger generation.
And also maybe more support for the LGBTQ plus community. Whereas in previous years there hasn't been a lot of that, so it would be nice to see that change.
Well, when Robert Prevost stepped into the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, he was introduced as Pope Leo XIV. By choosing the name Leo, he joins a group of 13 other popes who have taken this name, and it carries significant meaning. So why do popes choose a papal name? Well, it's been a tradition for centuries now. New popes are often drawn to the names of previous pontiffs they admire. So the name they choose can reflect their vision and direction for the church. It can also signal whether the new pope is progressive or traditional. Well, for the last pontiff, Pope Francis chose his name in honor of St. Francis of Assisi, the patron saint of the poor, known for his humility and simplicity. And Pope Francis's papacy has been characterized by a focus on humility, poverty, and care for the marginalized. Now, Pope Leo XIV's choice of name is seen by many as a signal of his support for social justice, aligning with the teachings of Pope Leo XIII, who led the church between 1878 and 1903. Well, Pope Leo XIII was a staunch defender of the workers' rights. And by choosing this name, the new pope seems to signal a renewed focus on those themes, and it also suggests a continuation of much of Pope Francis's ministry. According to the Vatican, the choice of name is a reference to the modern social doctrine of the Church. And of course, you can also read all about Robert Prevost, his views on issues, and his support for his predecessor on our website, cna.asia, and our mobile app. And that wraps up Friday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for watching.